Today, I have to say, perhaps more than any other studies thus far, and perhaps in all my studies in the Bible, it's ironic that I would say this, but this is one of the most inspirational study that I think we could possibly get into, and that's the study of the lineage, genealogy. According to the Hebrew concept of Toledo that I've been mentioning, that the book of Genesis is structured that way, with 10 Toledot, 10 genealogies. But please don't think that all the genealogies, the way they would list them is the same way. It's not. And particularly in chapters 1 to 11, the author is really trying to give us a message through genealogy. And genealogy provides a sort of break or introduction for the coming narrative. So it's genealogy, narrative, genealogy, narrative, genealogy, narrative. So there's a purpose in genealogy. He's not just trying to talk about the descendants. He has a message in this regard. So I hope that you can be inspired today to regard something like genealogy, which is considered very boring by many, many people. And they don't even bother to read through meticulously and try to really seriously regard all these names and data and information that's given to them. How many of you know what I'm talking about? We have like genealogy in Luke, right? Luke chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 1. And we don't take that seriously. We may remember a few names, but we don't try to remember all the names. Not that we have to remember every single name, but we should ask this question: what is the author's intent? What did Luke mean? What did Matthew mean? And we have genealogies all throughout the Old Testament, And particularly, what do these genealogies in Genesis mean? What's the message? What is the author intending to get across to us? Okay, so let's read this genealogy in chapter 5, and then we can enter into the study. Let's read this out loud together. This is the written account of Adam's family line. When God created mankind, He made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them, and He named them mankind, that's Adam, when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. After he became the father of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Seth lived a total of 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh had lived 9 years, he became the father of Kenan. After he became the father of Kenan, Enosh lived 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enosh lived a total of 905 years, and then he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he became the father of Mahalalel. And after he became the father of Mahalalel, Kenan lived 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Kenan lived a total of 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. After he became the father of Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Mahalalel lived a total of 895 years, and then he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, and he became the father of Enoch. After he became the father of Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Jared lived a total of 962 years, and then he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God, and then he was no more because God took him away. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. After he became the father of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Methuselah lived a total of 969 years, and then he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son. He named him Noah and said, "He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." After Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Lamech lived a total of 777 years, then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Amen. Amen. So how should we go about studying a genealogy like this? As I mentioned,
So 여기서 age가 actual age인가요?
okay, she is very scientifically oriented, huh?
아니 왜냐하면 크리에이션 때는 원데이가 아닐 수도 있는 거라고 했으니까.
Right.
여기는.
Well, the thing is, there's no genealogy like this, the way it's described in terms of actual number of years that this person had died, number of years before he had a son, and then rest of the number of years and total number of years. There's none listed like this, except the one that we will see later in chapter 11. We will see a little bit of that, okay? But we will not see that in general in other genealogies. They just list the names of the, the children begotten and so forth. So the question you have to ask is, why so specifically name
And age.
their age? Unless the author simply meant it to be the age,
I see.
right?
그러니까요.
And so the more conservative, and even now, after the liberal-minded way of interpreting set in for a while, in the scholarly field now, scholars are really looking into the literalness of these texts. And according to this, long ago, I think that was in the 1600s, there was a Bishop Ussher in England who calculated this, literally based upon this, and his calculation was that Adam was created in the year 4004 BC, which is like ridiculous for modern evolutionistic minded scientists to embrace, right? But that's what it calculated out to be. So how do we accept this? How do we understand this?
그러면 여기
Yeah.
그 아들을 낳았을 때 나이가 나오잖아요. 계속.
Yeah, right.
근데 그게 첫 번째 아들이라는 거예요? 아니면 그 전에도 아들이 있었는데 이 족보에 올라온 아들의 이름, 그 아들이 태어났을 때가 그 에이지라는 건가요?
그러니까 first son은 보통 올리지 않나?
Yeah, and the amazing thing about this is if you consider, you might not have thought of this, that during the time of Noah's flood, actually Seth would have just passed away when that would happen. In other words, like Adam was there all throughout to see all these descendants, not just his own sons and daughters, but his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. So all this is like a huge extended family, right? But then, of course, the human beings started migrating, spreading out more and more too. So this scenario is like fantastic if you think about it. The question that we have to ask is, can we take this literally? Okay, the important question is this. Does the author expect us to take it literally? Is that the intent of the author? And the answer is yes, I believe the author literally meant it to be taken in such a way. Okay, so let's start with that assumption that the author has intended us to take this as is, but he's got a message. He's not into numerology here, per se. Maybe a little bit, because he is interested in numbers and the symbolism of the numbers, as many in those days tended to do. But let's see what he's doing it here, okay? All right. So, like I said, in Genesis, there are 10 Toledo statements. And that has to do with something like this. This is translated into English. But in verse 1, this is the written account of Adam's family line. Okay? It talks about genealogy. It talks about what's going to happen continually. And so we see 10 statements like that. And in Genesis 1 to 11, we see 5 plus 6 of those statements.
5 plus?
5 plus 6. The reason why I say plus 6 is the sixth genealogical statement has to do with basically Abraham. Okay? And it's related to Abraham, which extends into chapter 12 and onwards. Okay? So just think about it. Out of 10, 6 of them are recorded here in first 11 chapters. Okay? I think the best way to start off this study is by comparing this so-called second Toledo statement with the first Toledo statement. Okay? I'm not talking about the whole genealogy right now, just the statement itself. So let's compare that. Okay? And so here we see, let's read this once again, verses 1 to, let's say all the way to 3. And I want you to look for some kind of pattern here. This is the written account of Adam's family line. When God created mankind, He made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them, and He named them mankind when they were created. That is Adam. So Adam is a personal name, but at the same time a generic name, okay? When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness and in his own image, and He named him Seth. What do you see here in this reading? A theme that is repeated over and over.
In his likeness.
Right. In his likeness, right? And so just remember that. This theme goes back. Now, if we compare this to the first Toledo statement, you know where the first one is found? Where was the first genealogy? This is the genealogy of Adam here now. So what comes before Adam? What kind of genealogy could be possible? And where do we find that genealogy statement? In chapter 2, verse 4. Now, when we get to chapter 2, verse 4, we know that the creation story has ended, right? Right? In chapter 1. And this is the closing statement here. This is the account of the heavens and earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. Okay? Now, many scholars would use this as a beginning of the rest of the chapter 2, which is true, but actually this fits more with the previous chapter. Why? Because the statement about the account of heaven and earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Right? And so why is it written like genealogy? What's genealogical about this? And what's the point the author is trying to make? And this whole repetition of image and likeness, where do we find that? In chapter 1, verse 27. So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them, male and female, He created them. So what's genealogical about this?
What do you mean?
Genealogy, when we think about genealogy, we're talking about descendants. He's just talking about Adam and Eve here. Does God have a genealogy? I guess that's the question.
Isn't the author trying to say we are from God?
Yeah. But how does that work that out in the form of genealogy? You can't just say that God created Adam and Eve and that's genealogy. There's got to be some detail. What's genealogical about that?
In his own image.
그러니까 보통 부모가 자식을 낳으면
Uh-huh.
자식은 부모를 닮았잖아요.
Right.
그러니까 여기서 in the likeness of God or his own image 이게 그걸로 좀 억지스럽지 않나요, 근데? 그렇게 해서 그걸 지니얼로지라고 하는 거 아니에요?
그러니까 what is the genealogical? genealogical 리스트가 있어야 되잖아. 한 사람만 멘션해서 되는 게 아니잖아. 내 자녀 하나 하고 그 다음에 genealogy 하면 that's kind of a very short-lived genealogy, right? So what is genealogical about chapter 1? chapter 1에 뭐가 나와요? description. day 1, day 2, day 3 다 description 뭐야?
이렇게 연결할 만한 게 없는 것 같은데.
Can I give you a clue and hint? I don't know when was the last time you ever looked at the genealogy in the New Testament. And this is genealogy that leads all the way to Jesus, right? Okay? Let's go all the way. Like, there are two genealogies in the Gospels, right? One in Matthew 1 and Luke 3. So if you look at Luke 3 genealogy, it goes all the way back, okay? From Joseph all the way back to, look at the end of chapter 3. Okay? It does the reverse of what we have seen and goes all the way back to the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. I mean, how could it be son of God? Was it really the son of God? I mean, Jesus is the only one who's the rightful genealogical heir, right? 근데 여기는 expression 자체를 son of God으로 하는 거예요. What is a son? What is a daughter? What does it imply? I mean, how would you define that? How would you define sonship, daughtership, childship?
Don't understand your
Okay.
question.
How would you define fatherhood, motherhood? Maybe if you think of the other way. What defines fatherhood or motherhood?
그 애가 태어날 때 그 DNA를 contribute 했죠.
Okay, that's scientific answer. But can you just be common about it? What determines?
굉장히 사이언티픽하네.
Yeah, I know. My
애는
wife
혹시
is
언니
really.
되는 거 아니야?
Yeah, I think so. I think 이두 사람이 뭘 하고 있는지 every day.
애가 목사님 되는 줄 알았는데 아니었네.
Yeah. 여보, in those days they didn't think that about DNA. They had no knowledge of DNA, right? So they would simply say, why is your father? 그러면 what? What would be the simple answer? Yeah, he's my origin, right? 그래서 우리 한국에도 Confucianism 자체가 is based upon the origin because he's my origin, he's my source, he's my biological origin, fleshly origin, whatever it may be. We call it genetic origin, right? But 부모가 그렇게 중요한 거예요, right? And I don't care how inadequate they were. I don't care what kind of loser they might have been. I mean, that's an extreme kind of statement. 우리 부모가 모범적이면 우리가 다 존경하죠, and we respect. But most parents fall short of that. But still, we must show respect and honor to them. Why? Because we will not be here in existence apart from them. 그거 한번 생각해 보라고요, 여러분. 여러분의 existence가 참 대단하고 막 wow. And you know, we may put down our parents or put down our ancestors thinking that we're something. But the thing is, your somethingness is all dependent on them being your parents and them being your ancestors. 이게 참 중요한 거야. 근데 더 중요한 것은 fleshly ancestry보다 더 중요한 게 뭐냐면 that we are linked to God. 그런데 how is this genealogical? That's what I'm saying. This statement in chapter 2, verse 4, it states it as though it's a genealogy. How? And then the answer would be, did God only create human beings? God created the stars and the sun and the moon and...
So is
God-
author trying to say 그 account of heavens and earth부터 시작해갖고 휴먼도 그 이 라인에 하나님의 크리에이션의 genealogy에 belong한다는 건가요?
What do you think?
I mean, it seems like.
Right.
Is that what you're asking?
Right, because genealogy is a listing, right? You got to have some listing in some kind of sequence. And he seems to be saying the first day, second day, third day, fourth day, it's all God's work. It all originated from God. So God is the father to all creation, basically. And he is also father to humanity, right? In that sense.
아니 근데 조금 너무 억지스럽지 않나요? 그러면?
Do you think so? But why is it genealogy then? You have to say, 이거 자체가 obviously chapter 2 verse 4는 it's a wrapping up statement, right? genealogy를.
근데 I could understand.
Okay, let me-
Because 이게 그냥 그 신약에서처럼 그 휴먼 라인을 보여갖고 예수님이 어떻게 오게 됐느냐를 보인다면
Yeah.
그냥 네임만 멘션하면 되는데
Right.
제네시스는 크리에이션을 말하고 있는
Right.
거잖아요. 그러니까는 I guess author had to show
Yeah.
that everything started from heaven and earth and human and we're all in the genealogy of God's creation. 그거를 제네시스에서는 보여줬어야 되는 것 같은데.
Because 보세요. 하나님의 genealogy, that is 하나님의 족보 그러면 하나님은 인간이 아니잖아요. 인간은 인간으로만 링크가 되지만 하나님은 everything that he's made, everything that came out of his mind, thought, and his created works could be considered genealogical. And maybe that's what he's trying to point out, that everything came from him. It didn't come from, polytheistic Godhead. It came from one Godhead, right?
그러면 이걸 약간 그 하나님의 지니얼로지랑 아담 쪽을 나눠야 되는 거 아닌가요? 그러니까 이거를 아담의 지니얼로지라고 하기는 좀 그런 거잖아요.
You mean like chapter 2,
네.
verse 4? No, it doesn't say this is Adam's genealogy. Look at this. Chapter 2, verse. This is the account of the heaven and earth. It's a genealogy of heaven and earth. When they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens.
그러면은 5장은 이제 아담이잖아요.
Right. 거긴 이제 아담의 genealogy가 되지만 여기는 actually you might even say this is a genealogy of God creating the universe, right?
그렇게 하면 이제 make sense가 하는데 이거를 이제 아담하고 자꾸 연결시키면 약간 아담의 지니얼로지라고 생각을 해서 제가 억지스럽다고 얘기했던 것 같아요.
Yeah. 아담의 genealogy는 여기 이제 5장 1절부터 나오잖아, right? That's very clear. 그러니까 what is chapter 2 verse 4? What kind of genealogy is that? That's the question I'm asking. It can't just be Adam, because Adam으로 끝나는 거예요. 거기는 Adam은 Eve밖에 없잖아요. 2장에도 Adam은 Eve밖에 없잖아요, right?
그러니까 하나님의 창조의 지니얼로지라는 거죠 이게.
Right. Author is taking that usual genealogical form of sequences, something beginning, something. 근데 he's using that as a sort of a pattern to talk about God creating something out of something, something out of something. He's doing all this kind of work, which is not a totally equivalent to human analogy. But from God's perspective, certainly, He can do that. Human은 그렇게 못하지. Did we create animals? Did we create nature? Did we create the sun and the moon and the stars? Of course not. But God did. So in that sense, 우리가 generically God is the father of all creation. 그런 말을 해요. 찬송가도 보면, joyful, joyful, we adore thee, Lord of all. 그 다음에 father of all creation. 이게 있잖아요. Father of all creation. And father of us humanity. But in the real essential way, he's only the father of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Okay? But in a generic sense, we can say he is the father. Okay, so let's start with that. That's the first thing I want you to understand. That there is some kind of a connection here. Because in the genealogy that we have today, he repeats that whole idea of like image. Just like Adam was the image of God. Adam and Eve, they were the image of God. Seth is the image of Adam. You see that? So what kind of genealogy is this that we're looking at right now? And I give you a list here. You see this little chart? Here's the genealogy here, all the way to Noah. Okay? So look at the pattern. Adam to Noah, through Seth. And then we see, if we compare the fifth Toledoth list in Genesis 11, verses 10 to 26, we see it starting with Shem. Who is Shem? Noah's son, right? Shem, Ham, Japheth. But it's this Shem's line that is selected, going all the way to Terah. But look at this. The pattern is that there are 10 Toledoth, but in 10 Toledoth, there are 10 figures here. And so one is missing. So the 10th person would be whom? Abraham. Look at these names. Adam to Noah, then Shem to Abraham. What kind of lineage, what kind of genealogy are we talking about here? 요 이름은 뭐예요? These are the key references. Adam to Noah. Then out of Noah is Shem that's selected to Abraham, which is now the chapter 12 is going to unfold with Abraham and the descendants of Abraham. Nation Israel is going to emerge from that. And the whole Old Testament is about the history of Israel, right? So this is the lineage of the chosen people. Okay, so keep that in mind. The author is intentionally talking about the chosen people. Okay? But if we compare Adam to Noah with the fifth Toledoth listing from Shem to Abraham, and I gave you, might not have given you that, but if you look at that in chapter 11, beginning with verse 10. Could you find it? And I hope you can see a pattern here. There is a difference between this listing, the pattern from this listing, compared to the first listing of Adam to Noah. What would be that pattern? Something that would differentiate this pattern from the other pattern.
10?
Yeah, chapter 11, verse 10. Onward. Can you recognize it right away? What would be the difference? There's a difference, actually, a very clear difference here. Besides the fact that the number of years that these people after the flood is much more reduced than before the flood. Okay, that we see immediately, that they didn't live as long. We're into 900 plus years before the flood, but afterwards you don't see anything 900 and over, right? And another thing that we see is that there's no mention of death here, does it?
Yeah.
Right? Okay?
그리고 아들들도 빨리 낳기 시작했네.
야, 빨리 낳기 시작했지.
수명이 짧아졌어.
Right. So why do you think in the first listing here, there's a mention of longevity of life and death? What is the author saying? They lived this long. Adam, 930 years. Seth, 912 years. Enosh, 905 years. Canan, 910. Mahalalel, 895. Jared, 962. Enoch is an exception to that, of course. So we'll talk about him. Methuselah, 969 years. And then Lamech, 777 years. That's relatively very short, but 777 is significant here.
So you're saying in chapter 11에서 author이 death를 mention 안 한 게 뭐가 이유가 있다고요?
No. In chapter 5, why does it end with, and then they died?
아, 왜 chapter 5에서 그걸 mention하냐고?
Yeah. Why is he saying this? And why is it so exact about begetting year and the years before begetting and years after begetting? Why is it so meticulous about this kind of pattern?
So, beginning stage니까 he want to make sure more.
So the focus is on beginning, right? Right? He couches everything and focuses on the beginning, having the son, having that lineage based upon the son.
아니 근데 그렇지도 않잖아요. 중요한 게 디프런스가 죽은 해를 멘션 안 한 거가 디프런스인 것 같은데요. 챕터 11하고 컴페어 했을 때.
그러니까 여기는 죽는 게 없잖아요. 죽는 해도 없고
근데
죽는
you
것이
said
없죠.
챕터 5에 begetting 하는 걸 임포턴하게 강조했다고 그랬잖아요.
Because it's sandwiched
Chapter
between
11 mentions that too, begetting.
right.
그냥 처음에는 계산을 다 해준 거고 두 번째는 니네가 알아서 계산해라 아니에요?
아니, 두 번째도 계산이 돼 있어요. 여기는 다 계산이 돼 있는데, okay. I guess the question I'm asking is, if you're going to talk about dying, why mention the longevity beforehand? Like 900 years. They had son,
아니면 뭐
and they had sons and
이렇게
daughters, and then they
이렇게
died.
오래 살아도 죽긴 죽는다 그거 아닌가?
My dear, have a little more confidence in that statement, please.
What do you mean?
Have a little more confidence. State that.
어?
지금 말한 거 좀 볼드하게 스테이팅
There's
하라고.
beginning and end가 있다는 거를 make sure 한 거 아니에요?
And why does he have to make sure that they die?
그걸 왜 맥시하고?
그게 이제
So wicked, right?
result of sin?
Because look at this. When we studied at chapter 3, God's judgment was that they're going to die.
Yeah.
But they didn't die. There was no mention of death. Right?
Yeah.
And that was supposed to be the judgment upon them. Death.
So 이렇게 오래 사니까 저지먼트가 데트라는 걸 깜빡 잊어버릴 수 있으니까 이거를 멘션해 주는 거예요.
Okay, something like that.
We're still human. You're gonna die.
But then why so long? Why does he emphasize the fact that they live so long? Why is that important? And then at the end, they die eventually.
So 너 이렇게 오래 살아도 you have to remember that at the end you're gonna die.
좀 지겹게 살긴 했어.
Okay.
900년 살았으니까.
그러니까 TV가 있는 것도 아니고 도대체 900년
그러니까
블레싱이 그만큼 오래 있었다.
Yeah, yeah.
블레싱이 그래도
그러니까 하나님이 넌 죽는다 그렇지만 see remember there's always this element of mercy and grace. 하면 넌 죽는다 그랬지만 곧바로 죽는 게 아니야. 마귀는 그냥 곧바로 죽는 것 같이 한다고 하면서 see you didn't die 그랬다고. But God never meant for them to just die right away.
900년이면 살 만큼 살았네.
Yeah. 근데 real death that he was talking about is a death of relationship, right? Of intimacy between God and humanity. So I guess what I'm saying is I want you to look at this contrast of the number of years and then death as the ultimate destiny. 좀 sad하지 않아요? 약간 if you think about it from a sort of poetic sense.
죽고 싶었을 것 같아. 거의 그 1000년을 산 거네. 1000년.
Yeah, I know. But 이때는 건강하게 비교적 건강하게 살다가 죽은 거잖아. This is not like
How do you know?
I mean basically you get this feeling because you didn't have the flood, you didn't have the decadence, we didn't have the nature and virus, just attacking them like the way we have today. Today we are in an ecological disaster era. Okay?
폴루션도 없었을 거고.
Yeah, it was all like northern Canada in those days, okay? Pristine beauty of nature and the clean air and pure water and right? So I want you to have that in mind, this longevity, wow, long history. And now the human beings are expanding, right?
그러면 이게 그런 관계를 강조한 건가? 에녹에 대한 에녹은 이제 케이플랩이니까 이게 하나님과의 관계가 이렇게
Okay, let's talk about the general pattern, then we're going to get to the specific exceptions. Enoch is an exception. Then we see Lamech is an exception, right? Do you see that? in this genealogy, there's a mention, there's a sort of little bit of description about Enoch and Lamech. And Lamech is the father of Noah, right? And so the author wants to really get at Noah's story, doesn't it? So he's setting all that up. And he's highlighting Enoch and Lamech. Where do we hear Enoch and Lamech? Is it coincidence that Enoch and Lamech overlaps with Cain's descendant? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Chapter 4, do you remember?
Yeah.
여기 리스트 보면
Lamech had two wives,
Yeah.
so his life got shortened.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very obvious.
그럼 솔로몬은 어떡하고?
살로몬도 일찍 죽었어.
Okay. So we have Lamech, who begins off, Cain's son, his name was Enoch, remember? And the description about Enoch, do you remember in chapter 4, was that the city was built in the name of his son, Enoch. Okay? Sort of like exaltation, pride is coming from my loin, this is my son, right? That's how Enoch is expressed. And then Lamech is following the same pattern as his, ancestor, Cain, by murdering someone and justifying that, even though he is right to say that, but there's a sense of arrogance in his statement, right? Enoch. That's Cain's descendants, right? Lamech, Enoch. 근데 이 두 사람이 하필 또 이쪽에 와서는 완전히 무엇인가 righteous한 액트를 하는 것 같이 디스크립션이 되는 거야.
두 사람한테 멋지게 있었구나.
So shall we look at these two exceptions? 한번 이 두 사람만 한번 파악을 해봅시다. Okay? 5 verse 21 to verse 24. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Together, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more, because God took him away. Why this narrative? What is the author trying to say? So in one word, what is he saying about Enoch? And we got a little commentary from Hebrews chapter 11 saying that Enoch was actually taken away without experiencing death, right? So this is pretty clear according to the Hebrews writer that he raptured out, kind of like Elijah.
근데 진짜 왜 하나님이 딱 이런 케이스를 하나 만드셨을까?
그러니까.
What's the reason?
I don't know about God's reason, but I think I know the author's intent in putting that story here. And thank God that God did make an exception of him. As maybe a sign that in this lineage, there is that kind of righteousness, that kind of special relationship, special hope. Do you remember the last statement about Seth? When Seth was born, it says that people began to call on the Lord, right? Remember that? So that gave a little hope that, wow, maybe something is getting readjusted. Maybe human beings are now becoming aware and conscious after all this curse and all this judgment. Now they're coming to be restored back to God. And 여기도 Enoch의 statement 보면 this is one of the most fantastic statement ever. Even from a New Testament perspective, 어떤 사람이 이렇게 산다면 그냥 뭐 끝내주는 거야. 그 죽음도 맛보지 않고, because the death signifies judgment, and this person bypassed all that and had the honor of being present before God without experiencing death. Okay. And then what about Lamech here? Let's look at Lamech.
이 사람이
Okay.
정말 그렇게 outstanding out of everyone 해서 God took him away or God just made a case out of him.
그런데 let me tell you from the Jewish tradition, there's this apocryphal writing on Enoch, which is very lengthy. Almost Enoch is hyper hero로 여긴다고. A lot of apocalyptic elements are there in Enoch. Why do they do that? Because they believe that literally Enoch was a very special fellow. Almost a mystical fellow. Kind of like Elijah, if you think about it. Elijah also did not experience that. He was taken away. Right? Those two.
모세도 사실 이스라엘에서 여기에 대한
아니 모세의 경우는 그런 말은 없어. They just, they don't know where his gravesite is, basically. Right? Nobody witnessed him dying, but the thing is, it doesn't say God took him away. God took him away 하는 것은 오로지 Elijah and Enoch. 두 케이스밖에 없어요. 그래서 나중에 이런 apocryphal and apocalyptic writing에, mystical writing에 그런 걸 집어넣어. Because that's so mystical. That someone could just bodily just be lifted out and be present with the Lord.
근데 이때 수명이 900이시잖아요.
Right.
근데 이게 뭐 이유가 있는 건가요? 365까지만 하고.
Okay, so I mean, I could play with this. 365 years would be like, where does 365 years? Does it ring a bell?
365일?
Yeah. So it could be. If they 이렇게 계산을 했다면, 그 solar 그 캘린더식으로 했다면, this would make sense too. That there is a significance that he actually lived a full life. Fullness를 말하는 거잖아요, 이게. Right? And I tried to kind of spiritualize that a little bit, but I don't know whether is it just coincidence that it's 365, which is the same as number of days in a year, full year. Maybe the author meant that. I don't know. I don't want to make more conjecture on that, but I just ask you to even think about all this specific, because he did this very meticulously, deliberately, intentionally. 그럼 라마크도 한번 봅시다. 그러면 verse 28 to verse 32. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son. He named him Noah and said, he will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the grounds the Lord has cursed. Listen to this prophecy. This is exactly the prophecy that counters the judgment that came upon the woman and the man. Right? Okay? That God's going to now comfort. Noah means comfort. Right? That God is now in the business of comforting. God's not going to hold his wrath towards them. He's in the business of comforting them, restoring them. It's not the curse that's the focus now. It's redemption. Already we see the element of redemption, God's mercy, God giving second chance. And then he says, after Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Lamech lived a total of 770 years. Now, is that significant? Yeah, 그거는 numerology에서는 뭐 777 하면 끝내주는 거잖아. Right? And then it says, after Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It doesn't say how many years Noah, because now we're going to enter into the narrative of Noah. Right? But at the end, it does say Noah lived all the way up to, in Genesis chapter 9, 950 years. 그리고 chapter 6 verse 9에 이제 우리가 노아의 스토리는 다음 주부터 들어갔는데 여기 이런 말이 있어요. 노아가 등장하기 전에 it says this is the account of Noah and his family. Okay, this is another genealogy, see? Right here. Chapter 6. Okay? That's the third genealogy. Toledo statement. And he says, Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Same statement that the author makes about Enoch. He makes the same statement about Noah. So we have all these connections, hints and clues. 여러분이 그냥 성경 쭉 읽다가 underline the key words that the commentator or the author is making. He's making a comment. He says at the time of Seth bringing his first son Enosh, people began to call on the name of the Lord. 그렇게 시작이 되는 거야. Then Enoch is an exception. He says Enoch walked with God faithfully. And then he was no more because God took him away. And 그 다음에 노아는 어마어마한 prophetic words from his father, and then he emerges. And the comment is, he walked faithfully with God. He was made an exception among the wicked generation. He was chosen. Did you know that 케인의 그 genealogy, 이거는 이제 톨레도스는 아닌데 자기의 자녀들, 우리가 지난주에 공부했잖아요. 다 이렇게 자녀들, I think there's like 7 generations here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 generations. That was the end. Flood, that ended. Cain's generation is no more. Or at least bearing Cain's name is no more. 이제 그게 흡수가 되었고 cross marriage가 있었겠지. 그걸 we'll talk about that next week when we talk about sons of God marrying daughters of men. And what does that mean? Are we talking about angels coming down and copulating with the human women? Or perhaps are we talking about, Seth generation having a relationship with Cain's generation. And that leaves a remnant behind even after the flood. Okay, so what do you think, guys?
이때는 이렇게 오래오래 살아갔고 라멕이 태어나고 이렇게 살 때까지 아람이 그때까지 살아있을 수 있었을 것 같아요.
그러니까 이걸 계산해 보면 그게 오버랩 되는 게 많아요. 그렇지만 by the time of the flood, they were already dead. 왜냐하면 they weren't part of the judgment 받는 그 제너레이션 아니었는데 그 후손들이 다 받았지.
그러니까 이게 다 아담이 어쨌든 900 years를 살았으니까.
Yeah, he saw a lot of these generations. 이걸 계산해 보면 나와요. And I think someone calculated that Seth was still alive during the time of Noah, but died before the flood. 그것도 계산해 본 거야.
Oh, really?
그러면 if you think about these giant, old men, like it's like an amazing extended family. If they wanted to keep, families intact.
그러니까 아담이 그렇게 오래 살았으면 그 밑에 사람들이 다 what happened to 그 Garden of Eden 얘기도 다 알 거고 뭐.
Sure.
다 서로 다 알 것 같아요.
Sure. 그러니까 이제 우리의 imagination이 그쪽으로 좀 생각을 해야 되는데 오늘날 the scholarly trend is to just write that off as nonsense. It's like, what are you talking about? Hey, wait a minute. You can't imagine a person living over 900 years? Of course not. Because you're operating with this kind of limited notion in the past few thousand years. But the Bible says they lived that long. Maybe we should change our imagination to fit into that. 좀 speculation을 그쪽으로 해야 되는데 don't even bother. They just write it off just like that. And another interpretation they have is like, in order to make the old earth argument, right? Because this is real young earth argument. 이렇게 된다면 the earth could be 10,000 years or whatever, right? Or at least human race within 10,000 years가 된단 말이지. Okay? Right? And that's a very young humanity history interpretation. They would like to take into 100,000, maybe even millions. 그런 얘기를 하잖아요, anthropologists. And I said, on what basis? And then they want to talk about the earth as being millions of years, maybe even billions years. 그런 얘기를 하고 있는 거예요. And so some people want to stretch this and say, you know what, this genealogy is not literally father begetting a son, but it could be talking about an ancestor begetting, a descendant. 그거를 categorically 그렇게 할 수도 있다. 그러면 좀 늘려. 아무리 그렇게 늘려봐도 how much can you extend? You see what I mean? Bishop ushered at 4,004 years? 보단 더 많겠지? 10,000 years? Okay, we'll give it 10,000 years. 그렇게 한다. Or maybe 20,000 years. But still, you're not going to reach hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years in terms of human origin. 근데 나는, I take it literally. Because the author specified it literally. And I don't think he was just writing a little fictional story about this. This is very meticulous. And how could the author have known this? And the premier author, of course, is Moses. Moses was a man of revelation.
근데 그때 이게 언제적이라 그랬지? Let's say 어쨌든 한 4,000년 전이잖아요. 이거 쓴 게 5,000년 전인가?
그러니까 지금 2000 빼고 그러면 2000. 그러니까 모세는 1,500 years.
So
We say Abraham은 all the way back to
Before,
we say
before Christ.
어쨌든 한 4,000년 전쯤에 썼다 그래봐요. 4,500년 전인가? 그러니까 이게 뭐 아담
3,500년.
오케이.
그렇게 되죠.
그러면 그때 시간을 calculate 하는 거랑 지금이랑 똑같았나?
똑같다고 생각해.
시간을 어떤 시간?
그러면 여기서 34 years old 뭐 950년에 죽었다.
그렇지. years는 pretty much, 해가 돌아가는 거 그걸 조금 missing few days 하지만 패턴은 계속 있잖아. solar
언제 시작?
system 자체. 그렇지.
GT에서 시작되지 않았어?
언제 시작?
lunar 캘린더로 우리가 계산하는 것도 있지만 solar system 자체로 그렇게 보는 것이 I think these are basically solar age.
오케이.
The sun based number of calculation. 아니 그런 것을 이제 우리가 공부를 해야 되는 거지. Because for me too, I ask all these questions. I have to check what geology, archaeologists, anthropologists, paleontologists would say. I got to go back to all that.
Yeah.
But what I cannot accept is the fact that they're speculating all these things by the millions. How can they extrapolate that much? Because they don't have the faith to believe that at least human history, I'm not talking about the history of the earth and the universe, but at least human history is in the thousands, at most 10,000s. But to believe hundreds of thousands is not necessary.
I agree.
그리고 그분들은 origin of humanity가 하나님이 이렇게 만드신 게 아니야. 이분들은 어떻게 their tree of life branches out from all these hominids, 인간의 그 ancestry, and they don't believe that it came from one. They believe there were other options. So we could be in the line of Neanderthals, or we could be in the line of certain other branches. 이렇게 계산을 하니까 이게 like, what kind of nonsense is this?
Yeah.
I'm not going to teach my kids that way. I'm going to teach them to trust the Word of God and leave the rest in the hand of the Lord when we meet Him in heaven. Okay. But once again, I go back to the author's intent when he composed it this way. And you can see that I may not be accurate. I may be off in certain things. I may be biased. But I'm just trying to show you there's a thought involved in this. There's intelligent design to this composition. This wasn't just hodgepodge of archaic materials put together. Maybe they were more sophisticated in thinking so meticulously and getting the message across than today. People just write very irresponsibly and loosely and non-committally. But here, I see an amazing discipline of. 그래서 이제 some scholars believe that this might be a company of prophets or one particular prophet in the lineage of Moses later on during the time of Cyrus and the return post-exilic period. That's like 5th century BC. Yeah, maybe bringing it all together. And some scholars think that this author, the final compiler and composer, is the very one who put the whole Hebrew Bible together from Genesis to Malachi.
Really?
I mean, some scholars think that why not? By that time, this would have been in full. 이제 컴포지션은 그때쯤 다 full 됐기 때문에 시대가 그렇다는 거지. 그런 이제 퍼스펙티브를 말하는 거지. Okay, so I think I pretty much covered everything. So let me hear your opinions or insights or reflection on this. What do you feel like you've learned or something got sparked?